It's 4 p.m. Thursday, August 8th here in Korea. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Hyundai. Our top story this afternoon, U.S. President Barack Obama has authorized targeted airstrikes in Iraq. Civilians in the region have been fleeing an area overrun by a powerful Islamist militant group in recent months. Our Connie Lee starts us off.
It's a green light to help those being persecuted in Iraq. U.S. President Barack Obama has ordered targeted airstrikes in northern Iraq and airdrops of humanitarian aid.
Today I authorized 2 operations in Iraq. Targeted airstrikes to protect our American personnel and a humanitarian effort to help save thousands of Iraqi civilians who are trapped on a mountain without food and water and facing almost certain death.
The president, however, emphasized that America would not be dragged into another war in Iraq. The Islamic militant group ISIS is gaining ground in northern Iraq, most recently seizing the largest Christian town of Qaraqosh and forcing tens and thousands of Christians and ethnic minorities to flee. The United Nations says about 40,000 of them are trapped in northern mountains. They've been ordered by militants to convert to Islam or face execution.
Women and children are being killed. We cannot get help. I have 4 children and I don't know where they are. 2 have disappeared and I don't know what happened to the other 2.
Mass killings of religious and ethnic minorities are reportedly taking place, with militants even beheading children. This, according to one Christian leader in Iraq speaking to CNN. The United Nations Security Council, after an emergency meeting on the situation on Thursday, condemned the attacks and called on the international community to support Iraq. Just in the past 2 days alone, ISIS militants with their black flags have taken over 6 towns in the north of the country. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
On a separate occasion, President Obama talked about the experimental drug that was recently used on 2 Americans to treat Ebola infection. Experts around the world are still discussing whether the outbreak in West Africa constitutes a public health emergency of international concern. Our Shin Se-min has this report.
After 2 days of emergency talks on the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, the World Health Organization will announce Friday whether it considers the matter a public health emergency worthy of international concern. If it deems that it is, the UN Health Agency will urge appropriate measures to curb the spread of the virus, which has thus far been largely contained to 3 West African countries. But concerns are spreading. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued its highest alert level this week in response to the outbreak. Amid growing international pressure to consider the use of experimental drugs in combating the virus, the U.S. government is forming a special Ebola working body that will explore its options. The calls have grown louder since 2 American missionary workers infected with the disease while in West Africa began recovering after taking an experimental serum called ZMapp. U.S. President Barack Obama has so far been hesitant to allow such untested medicines to be released for mass use.
I think we've got to let the science guide us. I don't think all the information's in on whether this drug is helpful.
The WHO says that more than 1,700 people have been infected in the current Ebola outbreak and that at least 932 people have been killed. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And this just coming in, the WHO has just declared that the situation in West Africa is indeed an international health emergency, and we will have more information on our later newscast as the story develops. Now, moving on, over in the border between Israel and Palestine, a 3-day truce expired as of 8 a.m. local time there in Gaza, which was about 2 hours ago. But before that, the Israel Defense Forces claims Hamas fired 2 rockets that landed in southern Israel. If that is the case, it would have been in violation of the 72-hour ceasefire. Negotiations to extend the truce ran into late Thursday in Cairo, Egypt. Now, Israel had offered to extend it, but Palestinian factions reportedly rejected the proposal. At a pro-Hamas rally in Gaza City, Hamas leaders said they were ready to resume rocket attacks if Israel and Egypt do not honor their demands to lift blockades into and out of Gaza. 66 Israelis and nearly 1,900 Palestinians have been killed in the one-month conflict. In the wake of April's ferry disaster, President Park vowed to root out corruption, starting with collusive ties between the public and private sectors. And for the first time since, an arrest warrant has been sought against a member of the National Assembly over suspicions that he took tens of thousands of dollars from a company in exchange for benefits. Connie Kim reports.
State prosecutors are seeking an arrest warrant for a National Assembly member over bribery charges. Ruling Saenuri Party representative Cho Hyun-yong is suspected of taking more than $150,000 from local train part supplier Sampyo ENC in return for awarding the company lucrative contracts. The prosecution accuses Cho of taking money from the Korea Rail Network before and after he was elected as a lawmaker in 2012. This marks the first time for an acting National Assembly member to be summoned since President Park vowed to root out corrupt ties between government officials and the industries they regulate following April's Haeworo ferry sinking. The president had apologized for the government's mishandling of the ferry disaster, which he partly blamed on corruption. It's common in Korea for retired bureaucrats to be hired by companies and public institutions that expect them to pressure their former colleagues or subordinates to ignore corrupt or irregular practices at the organizations. As of now, one sitting representative from the ruling party and 3 from the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy are under suspicion of receiving bribes. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Japan's wartime sexual slavery and its ongoing lack of repentance on the issue could stand in the way of the country's attempt to gain a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Now, this according to diplomatic sources at the UN, as international calls grow for Japan to atone for forcing tens of thousands of women into sexual slavery before and during World War II. The sources said the unresolved issue, which came back under the spotlight following a recent landmark visit of 2 Korean victims to the White House, will likely work against Tokyo ahead of the UN General Assembly in September. Japan is pushing for a UN Security Council reform while seeking to obtain a permanent membership along with Germany, India, and Brazil. The top diplomats of Korea and China will meet this afternoon on the sidelines of the ASEAN Regional Forum in Myanmar to discuss the North Korean nuclear issue. During the talks, Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se is expected to call on his counterpart Wang Yi to continue trying to persuade North Korea to soften its stance on the nuclear issue. The two will also likely discuss the latest series of missile launches by the North. Now, Friday's talks follow an agreement reached by President Park Geun-hye and Xi Jinping during summit talks last month, in which the two leaders set up conditions to resume the six-party denuclearization talks, which haven't been held since 2008. Korea's finance minister has called on the parliament to quickly pass a stack of bills that are needed to help boost the Korean economy. He says it needs to be done as soon as possible, as the structural problems influencing Korea's economy are deeply rooted. Kwon So-ah has this report.
At least 30 economic bills need to be passed as soon as possible to ensure they don't miss the golden time of a chance to revitalize the nation's economy. This is what Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said at an emergency meeting with economy-related ministers on Friday, once again putting pressure on lawmakers who have more than 7,000 bills awaiting parliamentary approval. Choi asked for the National Assembly's cooperation, stressing that this is the last chance to put the focus on raising household income, which should in turn boost domestic demand and the overall economy. He warned there wasn't much time, emphasizing the country's GDP increased a mere 0.6% in the second quarter of the year from the previous quarter. The minister said out of the 30 most urgent bills, 18 concern the investment sector, 6 the normalization of the housing market, 3 are related to the public welfare, and another 3 on the protection of financial and private data. To fulfill that goal, Choi asked that all ministers take the issue directly into their own hands to gain the understanding and cooperation of the people and the assembly, and told them he will be closely monitoring their progress. The government's new tax revision on conglomerates and others will be subject to parliamentary revision at a plenary session next week. Since before his inauguration as finance minister in July, Chue's priority has been on revitalizing the economy by easing financial regulations, which runs in line with President Park's deregulation drive. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Korea's largest automaker has been slapped with a $17.3 million fine in the U.S. for delayed reporting of a brake defect. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says Hyundai Motor failed to notify them in a timely manner that certain components on Hyundai Genesis sedans produced between 2009 and 2012 were at risk of corrosion, which could reduce braking effectiveness and increase the risk of a crash. The Korean automaker recalled more than 43,000 vehicles in October 2013 after the U.S. agency uncovered the issue. Hyundai says most of the affected vehicles have since been repaired. Chinese yuan-dominated deposits at local banks held by Korean residents jumped to a record high last month. Deposits reached $16.2 billion in July, up $4.2 billion from the previous month. The Bank of Korea attributed the growth to more local institutions putting their money in the hands of Chinese lenders who offered higher interest rate products than in the month before. Overall, foreign currency deposits amounted to $62.5 billion in July. That's the first time the total has topped $60 billion. Deposits in the U.S. dollar, the euro, and Japanese yen all dropped from the month before. Now, foreign investors have continued their buying spree in Korean stocks for a fourth straight month in July. Korea's Financial Supervisory Service says foreign investors scooped up a net 3.6 trillion won, or about $3.5 billion worth of local shares last month. The agency says the value of their shareholdings at about $443 billion at the end of July took up more than 33% of the total market capitalization. Now, by country, the biggest buyer was the U.S., followed by Japan and Saudi Arabia.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Na Hyung-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Rescue efforts continue in China's quake-hit Yuan province. Workers are still shuffling through the rubble in search of survivors. 5 days have passed since the region was first struck with a 6.1 magnitude earthquake, and the number of fatalities has since risen to 615, with hundreds of others in critical condition, according to local authorities on Thursday. Most of the deaths, more than 520, were in Ludan County. 76 others died in Chaojia County. Hundreds of epidemic prevention personnel have been dispatched to the quake zone as tests on the area's water found risk of enteric contagious diseases. And intense fighting continues to rage in eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian separatists are said to have shot down another military plane. Local media said the MiG-29 fighter jet was shot down in the Donetsk region Thursday local time, most likely with the same missile system suspected to have been used in the downing of MH17 last month. Meanwhile, Moscow has released more details on its full embargo on food imports from nations that had sanctioned it. Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said the year-long ban would include fruit, vegetables, meat, fish, milk, and dairy imports, and apply to Australia, Canada, and Norway, in addition to the U.S. and EU nations. And staying with Russia, former NSA contractor Edward Snowden has been granted a 3-year extension to his asylum in Russia. Along with the residency permit, Snowden's lawyer said he will also be allowed to travel abroad for 3-month stints and could be eligible for Russian citizenship down the line. His temporary asylum had expired on August 1st. While the decision was not a complete surprise, reports say it does represent a political dig at Washington, who wants him extradited. And back here in Korea, the nation is getting ready to welcome Pope Francis, who will be in town next week. He is expected to deliver a message for inter-Korean reconciliation, but he's not expected to travel to the demilitarized zone bordering North Korea. Our Ji Myung-gil reports on the Pope's itinerary released by the Vatican on Thursday.
Pope Francis will be the first pontiff in nearly 2 decades to visit the Far East when he visits South Korea next week. The Vatican said Thursday that during his 5-day visit, Pope Francis will attend the closing Mass at the Youth Day gathering and the Reconciliation Mass at Myeongdong Cathedral in Seoul.
Going to Korea and praying for reconciliation and peace for the Korean people has a great significant meaning.
He will also celebrate the Asian World Youth Day with young people across the continent and beatify the large group of martyrs who first brought the Catholic faith to Korea. He will find in Korea a Catholic church that exemplifies much of what he hopes for the church around the world to be, including a highly active laity. The Vatican also confirmed that North Korea has declined to send Catholic believers to a papal mass in Seoul, but said the invitation from the South Korean church was still open. Pope Francis will meet relatives of the victims of April's Seoul ferry sinking, as well as surviving Korean comfort women who were forced into sex slavery for Japanese troops during World War II. For the first time on a foreign trip, Pope Francis will speak in public on 4 occasions in English among his 11 speeches. The pontiff's plane is due to fly over Chinese airspace, and Vatican protocol calls for the Pope to send greetings to the leaders of all the countries he flies over. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
And major roads in central Seoul will be closed next week ahead of the papal visit. Pope Francis is scheduled to be in the capital city on August 16th to attend a beatification mass at Gwanghwamun Square in downtown Seoul. The city's police agency says starting from next Monday, access will be restricted to some roads around this venue. And a day before the mass, major roads encircling the square will be totally closed off, including a stretch from the central government complex to Sungnaemun Gate. The Seoul city government plans to temporarily adjust bus routes and subway times to accommodate the high-profile ceremony. Now, Korea, Japan, and China have rather complicated relationship with one another, affected by centuries of historical conflicts and disputes. But student representatives from the 3 countries are trying to look beyond the differences. Our Park Ji-won reports.
These teenagers from 3 different countries, Korea, China, and Japan, are laughing as they play games together. They may not understand one another because of the language barrier, but that isn't stopping them from enjoying themselves.
History shows us numerous conflicts between our countries. By actually meeting these people gave me fresh ideas about friendship.
Neither English nor Japanese work here, but it's great that we have so much fun beyond the language barrier.
The events are fun and the people here are very kind. I hope this can be an opportunity to promote mutual friendship and erase prejudice we might have against one another.
This program is part of an annual education tourism forum organized by the governments of the 3 countries. It was launched in 2006 to nurture a global mindset in the hearts of the young.
Germany and France have organized exchanges of about 7 million students. They've turned one's hostile memories of war into a new cooperative relationship. I believe Korea, Japan, and China can make a new road into the peaceful future through the active engagement of student exchanges.
Organizers hope the opportunity provides participating students a chance to develop a global perspective and builds mutual understanding. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News, Gwangju.
Now on to some health news. Varicose veins can cause a lot of pain and grief, especially in the summer when people walk around a lot wearing shorts and skirts in particular. Our Son Jung-in tells us how the conditions can be prevented by making small fashion changes.
Summer is the season for shorts and short skirts, but But there are some who won't even consider that as an option for fear of exposing their legs due to lumpy dark blue veins visible beneath the surface. Varicose veins are developed when valves and veins are weakened or damaged. That disrupts blood from flowing up toward the heart. The blood then collects in the veins, causing them to become swollen and twisted. The condition is often hereditary, but other factors like aging, pregnancy, or standing up for long periods of time can also contribute to the problem. Women whose hormones tend to relax the walls of veins are more likely to be affected than men, especially women in their 50s. But recently, more younger women are visiting the doctor complaining of the issue. According to data, the number of female patients in their 20s here in Korea surged 5% on average every year from 2007 to 2012. Doctors say it is important to prevent varicose veins in the early stages by wearing elastic compression stockings to improve blood flow. They also advise people not to cross their legs when sitting for a long period of time.
In some cases, simple laser treatment or sclerotherapy can effectively treat varicose veins. It leaves no scars so that people can regain confidence.
Standing in place and rising up on the balls of the feet can help strengthen the calf muscles to better push blood to the heart. 손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. We're closing out the week with a bright, sunny, and warm Friday here in the nation's capital. Now, people in the southern regions aren't faring as well, and the rain that's currently falling in those areas is forecast to continue throughout the night. And due to the influence of Typhoon Halong, the eastern coastal regions are also starting to see rain, with winds also picking up. And starting tomorrow, the impact from the typhoon will be greater in Jeju Island and the southern regions. And winds will reach up to 20 millimeters per second, and a heavy rainfall of up to 200 millimeters is expected. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Friday afternoon at 32, and meanwhile the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will top out to 31 and 27 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island will see up to 28, Dokdo peaks to 24, while Mount Kumgang tops to 16. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's a wrap for now. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with more at 6 p.m. Korea time.